It's been an incredibly tough time for many farmers affected by Cyclone Gabrielle. We know farmers will be needing to make some daunting decisions to get back on their feet, and it'll be hard to know where to start. So we thought it might be helpful to hear from one farmer who's been through something similar, who came out the other side, is still dairy farming, and can talk about what the recovery looked like. Dean Bailey was share milking in the Manawatu when in February 2004 a devastating flooding event left his farm and many others submerged beneath 2 metres of water. It was a horrendous time and it took 6 months before they were milking cows again on the farm. Dean will talk about how the recovery unfolded, the importance of good communication, rallying together as a community, and taking it one day at a time. As he says, the grass did come back again. In the second part of the podcast, you'll hear from Michelle Greaves, a regional partner in DairyNZ's Lower North Island team. She'll talk about DairyNZ's role in the response and recovery to Cyclone Gabrielle and provide some advice on how farmers can prepare for the seasons ahead. Dean, thank you for joining us on the podcast and giving up your time to do this. It's very good of you. Tell us a bit about yourself, Dean. Where are you farming?
Currently farming in Waikato, dairy farming 400 cows just out of Cambridge, and involved also with a equity partnership farm down in Paitua, Manawatu actually. Yeah, originally born and bred Manawatu.
Okay, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. Dean, how's the cyclone affected you?
On farm in the Waikato, we've been hit with the wind. Like most of the Waikato, we didn't get so much of the flooding, mainly the wind knocking over a lot of tree damage and crop damage. So not too bad. We were expecting worse, to be honest, initially. But the farm down in the Manawatu it's a floodable farm anyway, so it backs onto the Manawatu catchment area, and annually typically floods once a year. But this was quite a severe flood over the farm. So reasonably well affected across the board, I guess, but probably not as bad as our cousins in the Hawke's Bay and up north, that's for sure.
When you said you had some crop damage from the wind, what sort of damage?
So the maize in the Waikato was hit and blown over. Yeah, not all of it, but probably 60% of the maize, different stages. Fortunately, our crop was fairly close to harvest, and we're actually taking maize off this afternoon and tomorrow. So we'll definitely be compromised with a reasonable amount of yield. We're hoping it's only going to be sort of 20% down, but until we actually get it off, we won't know. So, and tree damage, fence damage, trees falling on buildings and cross tracks and that sort of thing. Just your typical cleanup after a storm. A lot of neighbours lost, quite a few trees as well, belts of shelter belts and fences that were taken out. And I'm sure there was isolated flooding in the Waikato, certain areas, but we didn't catch, on the day itself, we only had about 70 to 80 mils of rain compared to the Hawke's Bay that, were in the 400 millimetres. So.
Have you been in contact with anyone down in the Hawke's Bay? Like, do you know farmers down there?
Yes, yep, got some good friends down there that have been severely affected. Yeah, family and friends also. Cousin that was airlifted off a roof, and some other good friends that were in the East Valley and completely taken out, which can relate to in the 04 floods. We were farming in the Manawatu, share milking for Landcorp, and we were completely taken out in the 04 floods. We were farming in the Motua Basin, which is in the Foxton Shannon, and yeah, we had 2 meters of water over the whole farm, which was pretty fun. But learns a lot. So certainly can relate to the guys in the bay. Yeah, we were completely taken out in 04. We were out of farming effectively from the day the flood hit. It was 6 months later before we were back farming on that farm again. Probably 12 months before we had pastures back up and running. But so a challenging time. The biggest influence over how quickly we got up and running was just the relationships we have with people and the communication right across the board. It really tested your resilience and tested your ability to be able to get through. Very hard to look forward, but that's looking back in hindsight, it's a wonderful thing. But looking back on that time, trying to make decisions that were going to affect you going forward, and at this, really a lot of those decisions were being made on a daily basis, in trying conditions. But extremely fortunate to have a strong community, like a lot of these communities will be, and we relied on that more than we ever did. Historically in farming, I think if you look back over the decades, the farming communities always worked together. In the '04 floods, we certainly drew on that mentality, and we worked together with neighbours to get through. So that was massive. Shared the problems and worked together, getting our farms back up in operation. Shared machinery and people and skill sets, and that was invaluable, really. And mentally, it was huge because you didn't feel like you were battling on your own. And it didn't become quite as overwhelming when you had people to be able to draw on to help. Yeah, there was plenty of challenges, but it was just a bit of a day by day thing, really. Yeah, it's very hard to try and look ahead, but you just had to break it down into what you could control, what was immediately in front of you, and where you needed to be in a few days. And a few days after that, looking back, there was definitely things that we would have done different, but.
Say if you experience something like that now, how would you approach it differently?
Probably the importance of communication, making sure that we were all coming together as often as we could and discussing what needed to be done. And that just enabled you to plan that much easier. And we did it, we focused on that a fair bit. We were fortunate in the fact that I was sharemilking for Landcourt, and there was a group of us sharemilking for Landcourt that were all immediate neighbours. And so we had that commonality already as neighbours and farmers. So we really drew on that. But outside of the Landcourt farms, there was plenty of neighbouring farms that came and worked together and helped. So just really that communication, focusing on your people, recognising they're going through the same thing as that you are as well. And whilst they may not have as much financially at stake, they've certainly got, their whole world at stake. And, our staff lost all of their possessions in the houses. The homes were completely gone, so we were shifted out. We were, put up in temporary accommodation and all that sort of thing. And that has a massive interruption to your family life and to your children. Our kids were only small at the time. So trying to get all that balanced and recognising, those sorts of things, trying to minimise the anxiety and the levels of stress as much as you can, and that's where that communication and those problems shared are extremely important. You don't want to destroy bridges; you want to try and build them because, a lot of those sorts of things are tested, and you've got to be able to work with your neighbours down the track and work with your business partners and your people, and so communication, working together, trying to find the positives amongst all the complications that you're dealing with. We used the local school hall where we gathered every day. At the end of the day, the school fed us in the home ec room. So it was a real community effort in Foxton. It was massive, and we had people turning up. We had people outside of the industry, outside of the community coming and helping. Other farmers helping farmers. That was massive. I remember one day 2 utes pulled up at the farm and 8 guys got out, and they didn't know me. They didn't know. They had no connection with the farm, but they were there just to help with their fencing gear and their tools and see where do you want us, and those sorts of things you never forget. Still 20 years later, or nearly 20 years, 19 years ago, you still have relationships with those guys, which you don't even forget that stuff. Really important.
Dean, you said that you had really valuable support coming in from outside of the farming community, but I'm interested in knowing, were there any support organisations that you called on? And I guess similarly for farmers who are going through this stuff right now, are there any organisations you'd recommend that they turn to for help?
I think today, those support mechanisms, are probably there and a lot more than they were 20 years ago. The Rural Support Trust, and the different farming groups. I mean, Federated Farmers were pretty active. The government were pretty active too back in that time, and there was support for helping pay wages and getting those sorts of things up and running. The Civil Defence, the Coast Guard Rescue, all these guys came and helped us, which was extremely valuable. I think too that to try and keep clarity and perspective, it's really good to talk to people that are outside of the mayhem, because they are able to give you perspective. And when you're stuck in that daily, where do I go, and dealing with what seems just like an impossible task, it's good just to talk to people that are outside of that. And I had a number of farming mates that came down and just were able to look at things differently. So that was huge. So there's definitely organisations that we drew on, but ultimately what got us through was our community and the people and the relationships that we had around us, and building on those. It was a massive event. It took the whole community to help get us through. But 12 months later, the farm had we were fortunate that we didn't have a huge amount of heavy silt. We were in a situation where a stock bank breached, and waters came and rose in a basin that we were farming in, and we're surrounded by stock banks, so the water level come up 2 metres, and almost right from the get-go we knew that we had to exit everything out of that area. The logistics of getting transport and stock out of there, but that was our first priority, was getting our animals and the welfare of those animals, getting them to safe ground and keeping them alive, and so that as farmers we could continue to have a livelihood once we recovered. And so those cows were trucked out onto other properties. It was extremely important that we kept those animals in lactation, and we had something that somebody was prepared to take on, because they were going to receive the milk from them, and it didn't cost us. It didn't cost us to have them grazed out as such. So minimising your costs, and they are the initial things, and then the people side of it. We had 18 staff altogether within the Landcorp sharemilking group, and making sure that they were all, as best as we could, looked after, and they had security and assurance that we're going to try and get through it together.
Dean, you were obviously faced with a mountain of tasks in those early weeks. Was it difficult to prioritise what to tackle each day?
It was, and you continually the goalposts shifted all the time, and it's very hard to decipher. We had people that were willing to help, and we sent some stock to different people, and then they'd run out of feed in 3 weeks' time, and so you sort of very quickly had to try and manage making sure that your decisions you were making were not just for the next few weeks, but actually for the next 6 months. Where were the stock going to go? Could they stay there for a good length of time? I think about the traceability of animals and all these things that have improved in the industry, and that's probably going to make a big difference today. Back then we didn't have EID scanning and all that sort of thing, so we had animals loading up on trucks simply because they had to leave the farm. I remember one day we had 36 truck and trailer units lined up, and we didn't really know, in all honesty, where the cows were going. And I got a call from a farmer. This is a true story. I got a call from a farmer in Taihape it would have been 3 months post the flood, 3 or 4 months post the flood, and he tracked down my lifetime identification and found out they were my animals, and said, I've got 50 of your cows here. And I had no idea he had 50 of my cows, and that was, and no, didn't expect anything for the grazing. He'd looked after them. There was 4,000 cows that we were dealing with. Five farms all had roughly 700-800 cows each. So, it was a big number of animals, and they were all put together when we got them. So initially it was, save the animals, get them to safe ground. We started walking them around the district and relocating them as best we could, trying to find pasture, ringing farmers. The communication to get all of the logistics of this happening was massive. So that was your initial response. I guess firstly it was making sure people were out and safe, and we had a bit of time for that, which was a real plus. The guys on the bay, didn't have that luxury. A lot of them. We had probably 24 hours of the waters coming up, and we were able to make sure people were safe, and then we were able to walk the majority of our cows onto higher ground, and then from there we logistically worked through where we were going to get the cows to and how long we were going to be out for. Looking back in hindsight, it probably helped the fact that we knew that we were most likely going to be out of action for a very long time. So we could actually make decisions that were going to be long-term or at least medium-term decisions. That helped. And then once the waters went, it took 6 weeks we had to pump all the water out of the basin pretty much. And 6 weeks later before we got back in to start cleaning up. So that was a long time sit and wait. But at the same time, we were able to get stuck in and draw on resources. We all worked together. The tractors all went to one farm and everybody worked hand in hand, and we got one farm up and going, and we were all absolutely wrapped that farm was operational. And then we went to the next farm and we worked through it, So it was very piecemeal. We had lots of social gatherings and shared dinners and meals, and that was really important.
Dean, thanks so much for sharing that. I mean, what a heck of a thing to go through, and it's really valuable to hear about your experience and what got you through it and what you've learned from it. I was wondering, do you have any words of encouragement or advice, anything you can share with those farmers who are in that place right now in various parts of the country? Anything you can share other than what you've already talked about?
I think the first thing that they need to know is that things will get better. At the moment, it's the worst that it can be, and it will only, things will only improve over time. It's, I guess, sitting down and making a plan as best you can amongst all the mayhem. And there'll be plenty of farmers at the moment that are just trying to deal with the mayhem, and trying to get communications and infrastructure up and running and all those sorts of things. But try and sit down and make a plan and get some clarity. And realise that in time things will improve. And as I said, dealing with the silt, that's a big monster that they have to deal with. And there was people in 04 that had a lot more silt, and particularly in the hill country around the Manawatu, Rangatiki, that lost whole farms, buried the fences, etc. But time does improve things, and things will improve. It's just making sure you arm yourself with as much of those of the help you can get, and work through to a plan. Green grass will return, and sooner than you think. And the beauty, I guess, of farming is that it's a seasonal thing. And 12 months from now, things will be a hell of a lot better and clearer than what they are now. But they've got a tough road in front of them. But yeah, just draw on your resources and talk to people, and take the help that's on offer, and just realise that you're not there on your own. There's the farming community in New Zealand is particularly in these situations is pretty staunch, and you need to draw on those that can help.
Good stuff. Thanks, Dean. Thanks for sharing that. Look, lastly, for any farmers who haven't been affected by this current cyclone and who haven't been through such an extreme weather event like this, what advice would you have for them?
Yeah, I think think about your farm operation and where you're vulnerable. Roading, if stock trucks can't get through, if power's out for a long time, those sorts of things. Are generators something that we need to think about a lot more now? How well do I get on with my neighbours, and how important are they to making sure that I get through adversity? And I keep talking about it, but it's extremely important. And where you might plant trees, how you might go about setting up the structure of your farm, where houses, if you're building accommodation on your farm, where are the areas that you can put it where you're going to mitigate some of that risk as much as possible. So your infrastructure, for example, on the Manawatu farm that floods frequently, we positioned the fencing and the races so that it went with the water rather than against the water, so we catch as little debris as possible. It seems fairly simple, but it's actually really important when a flood hits. It's all that debris and stuff that you got to clean up, and it can destroy the interior of your farm, and it can be pretty soul destroying. But yeah, those sorts of things, thinking about the infrastructure and where you place things and how you might mitigate those in the future.
Thanks for your perspective, Dean. Brilliant.
No problem. Cheers.
Good man.
And wish anybody out there that's going through it all the very best. You just one step at a time, small bites. If you can just do one thing each day that improves something, it just makes you feel better. Even if it's just fixing one broken wire or picking up something that's broken or what have you. Just small steps. Try and keep the horizon in front of you.
Thanks, Dean. Champion, mate. Thanks for joining us. So we're now on to the second part of our podcast, and joining me is Michelle Greaves, who is a regional partner in our Lower North Island team. Michelle, welcome, and thank you for giving up your time today.
Hi, Ben. Thanks for inviting me to join you.
Michelle, what are some of the avenues or tools that farmers could consider using when recovering from an adverse weather event like this current one?
Well, firstly, Ben, I'd just like to acknowledge and, talk about our thoughts are with obviously our farmers at this time. It is very challenging for some, and the support required and things for some of them is huge, really. So DairyNZ has cyclone response web pages where we provide key information around areas likes of the people, the animals, the business, the farming business, and also feed requirements and pasture management and things like that. So on those web pages, we also include links to partner agencies. So really important that, we're all working together here. And so the likes of Rural Support Trust, MPI, Federated Farmers, and the supply companies, to name a few, we have got the links to their resources as well and what is available. There are government grants and funds that are available to the affected farms, up to $10,000 for pastoral farmers. That link is also on those web pages, as is a link to our feed budgeting tool. And the purpose of this tool is to understand where affected farms, where they're going to have feed pinches going forward. And it also helps to provide farmers with an action plan really on their pasture management and crops going forward, because as we know, autumn's just around the corner and then we head into winter. So some thoughts need to be put in place around how they're going to feed their cows through this, because immediately quite a lot of farmers were in a pretty good feed situation because we're coming off the back of a reasonable summer growth-wise and things in some areas. So DairyNZ extension partners and rural regional partners are available to help with this budgeting tool as well.
And if farmers want to get in touch with, our team members, how do they do that?
So the contact details are on our DairyNZ website, and ringing the local DairyNZ offices, which are also listed on the website, the team there, the admin and events support, would point farmers in the right direction as well.
Michelle, we know that affected farmers will be having differing experiences based on how hard they were hit. Could you talk to us a little bit about what that recovery looks like? I understand that you've been speaking with some farmers in those parts affected.
Yes, I have had the opportunity to talk to some of the Hawke's Bay farmers, particularly Patoka and Tutera. And situations vary region to region. We have some farms still awaiting power, so they're still fully utilising generators. We have other farms that have limited power now, and some areas are still using generators for running of other equipment on farm. Road access is limited, and in some areas is non-existent still, where the only access in is by boat across the river and or helicopters. And of course, the ongoing challenge with a boat across the river is we are still getting rain in some of these areas, and so river levels are still, can be high, which provides other challenges as well, in particular if you're wanting to move stock and things like that. So, and we're 3 weeks into recovery, 3 weeks in since the event, and so to think that some farms are still without power will be pretty challenging for farmers. Fuel supply is also a concern, in particular where the farms are running generators and they have operating machinery. If they've got their own farm machinery and they're being able to utilise that for cleaning up, there's this balance between fuel supply and good use of fuel supply. In the main, most farmers seem to have their stock water sorted now, so they seem to the water supply on farm, animals are getting water. Cows have been dried off in a lot of the areas where farms are inaccessible by supply companies. So cows have been dried off and supply has been ceased on those farms. Nate and Osprey are working with farmers regarding stock movement. So there are some farmers who have got more stock on farm currently where they're not able to move stock off because of the situation. Stock was due to move, and this is now with no accessibility along roads. They're now left with stock that they wouldn't normally carry at this point. And so, there's some work there happening around that stock movement. In some areas, farmers are moving stock by foot. So they're doing the old drover, if you like, taking stock by foot to a point that is accessible by transport companies to collect the stock. So,
what sort of distances are some of them having to travel?
To be honest, I'm not sure, but to put it into perspective around numbers, the farmers I was speaking to yesterday, there's sort of in the minimum of 1,000 to 2,000 cows of varying types, that are being moved. Well, they're attempting to move them. So, that's quite a lot. And obviously, it's a big job to undertake. So fence maintenance and repairs are slowly being undertaken. So some farms have had equipment transported in. And so they are making a start on maintenance and things like that. So so it varies really. No two farms seems to be the same as far as where they're at in their situation.
And Michelle, farmers who are dealing with these masses of silt on their land, where are they at in beginning to move some of that off the farm?
Where they've been able to get equipment in, or they have had their own equipment, or there's accessibility within a community of equipment, yes, some farms are underway with that. In particular, like, for instance, the lower North Island, so more local here, localised on one of the rivers, the road was not taken out at all. And, we've had support from diggers and community where they've come in and helped farmers because they can get on farm to do that. Where the farm isn't accessible, that is going to be a challenge because they can't get the heavy equipment in. There are Bailey bridges going in, my understanding is, and some bridges are being replaced with Bailey bridges. And so then it's just to, as to what weight they can take and things like that. So, it is a challenge. And for some, it really depends on how quickly the roading contractors can manage those bridges and roads, basically.
What's DairyNZ's role in the recovery and response to the cyclone?
So DairyNZ has front-footed the response in coordinating immediate needs and understanding them following the cyclone. Affected farmers have been contacted to understand the individual needs, more from the people point of view, and actions were obviously taken as required and what they were required with. So there were farmers involved in those groups as well. Industry partners, obviously, supply companies, federated farmers, civil defence, Rural Support Trust, and also advisory groups were all involved in those immediate calls to check in and see what was required. And then supplies, medication requirements, and any wellbeing concerns, especially for those farms that were isolated, they were responded to immediately. Choppers, have been going in and out, obviously, with food supplies. And as I said before, boats, where rivers have been able to be crossed with boats, then food's gone across on boats, and also and medical supplies and things like that is required. But not only that, it's everything. It's supplies to help with drying cows off. It's veterinary products, to help with animal health. And so all of those things, those immediate needs were addressed. Generators for those guys that didn't have generators, the sourcing of generators or getting them so that at least they've got some form of power. So that, that was sort of the immediate. Now we are recontacting those farmers to now look at what's required for phase 2, which is sort of the recovery and the what's next, and also to understand the timeframes around, as I highlighted before, where each farm is at with regards access, power, and what can be done as far as, is there any feed deficits that need to be addressed as far as feed supply for stock.
And so, Michelle, as a regional partner, you're spending a fair bit of time on the phone right now contacting farmers, finding out where they're at and what they need, and then trying to point them in the direction of the support that's available. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. That is right. So then if farmers are worried, as I said, about feed pinches and feed deficits going forward, and if we can get access on farm, then we will go out and support them through, working through their feed requirements and, what things they need to consider. We're also working with the national coordination around the feed that's been offered. There's been lots of offers from fellow farmers throughout the country for supplement feed and help, if needed and things like that. So we're doing a bit of that too. We're coordinating that with different groups and working together.
Michelle, just one final question, and it's the same question I put to Dean in the first part of the podcast, but do you have any advice for farmers on how to prepare for future adverse weather events like this one we've been through?
Before I answer that, Ben, I really want to say that what's been really obvious is the resilience of our dairy farmers and the fact that they help each other and check in on neighbours who may not be dairy farmers. They may be lifestyle people or sheep and beef that are all in the same communities who have been impacted as well. Holding community dinners, eating out of each other's freezers because they're defrosting,
Yeah.
and you know what I mean? Like it's all pulled together to make sure that everyone is supported and well fed. And the other thing too is, as I said before, the groups of farmers that have rallied and gone and want to, get in there and help with the cleanup, working bees on farms, and then the supply of grazing and feed. I know of a digger driver who offered his time and driver and donated it to a farm, to help. So there's some real generosity out there, which is really lovely. Going forward, like some of the key things for me, it's about having a contingency plan, I think. Really planning for the what if, because the what if is actually, it's becoming a little bit more regular, if you like, when you look at, some of the activities we've had to manage in the last wee while. So things like considering owning your own generator, if you are remote, and if the likelihood of power going off and staying off for some time. I was talking to a farmer who said, we used to think 2 to 3 days, we need to be able to survive 2 to 3 days. And he said, it's becoming really obvious now that we really need to be thinking a week to 10 days. How do we manage a week to 10 days if the power doesn't go on, and if, the roads are not accessible, and really being prepared for that. Means of communication, one of the biggest challenges for some of the farmers and also the people trying to contact them, and we've seen this both in the urban and the rural space, is comms. We're very reliant on cell phone coverage and internet now as a form of connectivity, and so things like sat phones, satellite internet, Starlink, those sorts of things could be money well spent, to help take some of the pressure off, being able to talk to the right people at the right time versus being sort of isolated and not feeling like you can make traction. And the other area, of course, that's been a bit of a concern is this area of fuel, and whether or not, you need to consider your fuel storage, obviously staying within legal requirements and things like that of how much fuel you can have, is actually, have you got enough fuel to go, a week, 10 days, or, to run what you need to run? Considering all those things, I think. I mean, farmers in the main, and one farmer highlighted this to me as well. He said, when you live rural and you are somewhat remote, you do have everything you need to sort of get by. You've got your gas, you've got your camping equipment, you've got, bits and pieces. Generally, your cupboards are full, your freezer's stocked, and because that's how you are, because you are remote. And so I suppose it's then taking it that sort of next level and thinking, well, that meets the human need. What about how does the farm business carry on? What's the contingency plan for the farm business to be able to manage this? Because it is a business and income is at stake as well.
Great advice. Thanks, Michelle. And thank you so much for your time today.
No problem, Ben. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Talking Dairy. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you'd like to check out more of our podcasts, go to dairynz.co.nz/podcast or find us on your favourite podcast platforms. Catch you next time.